Please state the nature of the E.A.M.H. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Off My Bridge. My name is Guy and today we are dealing with personal combat. There are three types of combat: personal combat, social combat, and starship combat. Personal combat, I like to try and remember this acronym, E.A.M.H. And that stands for Establish, Act, Momentum, and Health. Your E.A.M.H. Because personal combat is divided into four general spaces that if you can remember those different groupings, you will find your personal combat rolls forward nice and smoothly as it was designed to do. E stands for establish, and you have to establish a few things within the personal combat. The very first thing that you have to do is you have to establish the relative positions of the characters to the enemy, to the target. And as with starship combat, we have different zones. We have reach, close, medium, long, and extreme. And reach combat is literally within reach. You can reach the character. So that is melee combat. That's important to bear that in mind. It's melee combat. Anything over that is suddenly ranged combat. And we start talking about zones. So reach is 0 zones away. You are in the same zone as each other. Close is 0 zones. You're in the same zone, you're in the same room, you're in the same operating space. You could talk to each other comfortably without having to shout. You then get medium, which is 1 zone away, and medium requires you to shout a little bit. So you can almost imagine that like being a hall of some kind. You then get long, which is 2 zones away, and, well, quite frankly, you have to really strain to be heard, or just use your communicator. Finally, you get extreme, which is 3 zones away, and that you have to use a communicator because you cannot be heard beyond that point. It's important to know what zone you are in because certain weapons have different ranges, and the ranges are listed as zones. So that once you have E established, the zone in which all of the different characters are operating, you then need to establish the initiative, or initiative, of the characters. The rules as written state that generally speaking, the players will have initiative and will act first, unless the GM spends threat to claim initiative from the players. I hold, personally, that if the players are Federation, they should never act first if there are opposition enemy involved, unless they know with certainty that the opposition are evil and that are definitely aggressive and going to attack species 8472, the Borg. Remember, the Federation is all about talking, negotiating, understanding, respecting others before attacking blindly. Nonetheless, you have to establish the initiative. You then need to establish the weapons that are involved. Klingons, for reasons known only to the Star Trek creators and for reasons of cool, like to use their batleths, mechleths, all those wonderful different those point-blank reach weapons. So they run and rush over territory to try and get to the enemy. Everybody else uses phasers and disruptors and the like. But you need to establish what the ranges of the weapons involved in this combat are and what weapons are accessible and not accessible. Once you have done that, you are finished with E. You have established location and means of attack as well as who is going to attack first. We then move into the A, act. Now everybody gets to act. And that means making an attack. Now, if you are within reach, range, you may use a melee weapon. Melee combat only uses daring plus security. And there is a difficulty of 1. If the target that you are targeting is unaware of your melee attack. So if you are going in and you're just trying to stab that Ferengi in the back, the Ferengi doesn't know that you're coming, the difficulty is 1 in order to successfully land your attack. If the opponent knows that the attack is coming in, they make an opposed roll. And what that means is they are also going to make a daring plus security roll. You make your daring plus security roll, do whatever it is you need to do, and whoever has the most successes succeeds. That means if you're trying to stab someone and your opponent gets more successes than you do, you cannot stab them. You avoid stabbing them. They have brushed your hand aside. They've knocked your hand aside. They've double fist punched you in the gut, causing you to lose whatever it was that you're going to do. You don't take any damage, but your attack also doesn't deal any damage. Ranged attack is different. Ranged attack is control plus security with a difficulty of 2. Now that difficulty can also be modded up or down, usually it's up, by the particular weapon that you're using. Some weapons make it more difficult to fire. There is no opposed roll, unless your target has cover. The moment you have cover, it is now an opposed roll, and your opponent is using control plus security to not be where you are shooting. And once again, those are opposed, most successes wins. Here's where it gets just a little bit complicated. If someone is shooting at you and you make an opposed roll because you have cover, but you also have a ranged weapon, if you successfully dodge out of the way of the attack, you can then counterattack. You spend 2 momentum to counterattack. And what that means is you automatically deal the severity of your weapon to the attacker. They can do the same to you, however. So bear that in mind. The GM would spend 2 threat, and suddenly your attack turns into you taking damage. So that's an interesting little twist, and something that we often forget. We need to look at the other act part of the act, and that is the actions, the actions, of course. During combat, you can take a minor action and a major action. And there are a few minor actions that you can take, but there are a few that are more likely to be taken than not. And those are aim. When you take the minor action aim, you may re-roll 1 of your attack die. That's really powerful. That's really powerful. So as a minor action, you should always be taking the aim action. The alternative is drop prone. Now, when you drop prone, the difficulty to hit you at medium range increases by 1. So it becomes difficulty 3 to hit you with a ranged weapon if you are prone. Unfortunately, at close range and melee range, your opponents generate 2 bonus momentum whenever they attack you. Those are the minor actions. The major actions are pretty much your bog standard major actions, but the one that most folks are going to be taking is the attack action because, well, you're in a fight. You want to fight back. That concludes all of the act part of the E.A.M.H. The next section is momentum. And momentum spend is how you change up the severity value of your weapon. Generally speaking, after you are successfully hit with a weapon, you can spend 2 momentum to increase the severity by 1. You can spend a further 2 momentum to increase the severity by another 1. So 4 momentum equals an additional 2 points of damage. That's really powerful, and generally speaking, that's as much as you can spend in a given turn. 4 momentum. That's a lot of spend, but 2 damage? You're going to see when that's added to the weapon's severity is really powerful. You can then, of course, do all of the other momentum spends, creating traits, etc., etc., etc. But one that is of interest is you can disarm your opponent. If you spend 1 momentum, you can disarm your opponent of one-handed weapons. If you spend 2 momentum, you can disarm your opponent of 2-handed weapons. So momentum spend increases severity. What does this really mean? Well, we know that severity equals damage, but what does that mean in terms of Star Trek Adventures 2? Well, you have your stress. Each character has stress, and how much stress you have depends on how healthy your character is. Every time you take damage, you first reduce the damage value from your stress total. Once your stress total reaches 0, that's when you're then in trouble. Because when your stress reaches 0, you then are fatigued. That means you suffer a +1 difficulty to all checks moving forward. Any check you make has an additional +1 difficulty. It also requires you to choose one of your attributes, and that attribute you will automatically fail whenever you have to use it. So becoming fatigued is really, really, really bad. The next damage you take, since you have no stress to absorb the incoming damage, you suffer an injury. Now, the moment you suffer an injury, your character is effectively defeated. You are removed from combat, you drop to the floor, you can't do anything, you can't pass anything, you are injured and out. What is super critical, folks? Super critical. You need to record the severity value that took you out. So if you were taken out by a severity 4 or a severity 6, you need to record that. It's important to record that because the medics are going to need that information later on in the next scene. You're not dead if you suffer this injury. And as a matter of fact, if you get attacked again and suffer another injury, you simply continue to record the injury at the severity level on your character sheet. You don't die unless the weapon that is being used has a deadly setting. If it is set to deadly, then unfortunately, unless your character receives help in the actual combat, at the end of combat, that character dies. Now, this is great in terms of a dynamic. It means anybody with the first aid skill can act during combat to stabilize your character. And what that does is it removes the injury on a superficial level. It's like repairing a starship in the middle of combat. It removes a breach, but it doesn't actually solve the breach. The breach has to be resolved later on. It's the same as injuries in personal combat. Your character is no longer defeated. They are simply in the fatigued state because they have 0 stress, and they can now act as normal with the +1 difficulty and 1 attribute that they will always fail penalty for having 0 stress. It means they're not going to die at the end of the scene. We then get to the H, the healing part. This is now post-combat. The characters have successfully done what needs to be done, and they are now triumphant, but they now need to take stock of the combat. By taking stock, it means looking at their stress value and trying to recover stress. Stress is relatively easy to recover, and as a matter of fact, you can recover stress whenever you successfully complete a task. You can spend 2 momentum to recover 1 stress, to a maximum of 3. It's a bit expensive way of recovering stress. A much easier way is to take a breather. Literally a couple of minutes, have a drink of water, have a cup of coffee, and that restores 4 stress. Alternatively, you could take a slightly longer break, 30 minutes or so. That gets you back 8 stress. That's a lot of stress. Some characters might have more than that though, in which case then you're going to have to take another break, or you're simply going to have to sleep, and when you sleep comfortably, you get all your stress back straight away. So stress is fairly easy to get back. What is not easy to get back are your injuries. Your injuries require you to go to the med bay, and it requires a surgeon or a doctor who's pretty good at what they do to patch you up. The doctor is going to have to make a control plus medicine check with the difficulty equal to the severity of the injury. Remember, I told you to keep track of the severity of the weapon that damaged and put you into the injury state. This is why. The doctor will ask you what was the severity of the weapon that hit your character, and that sets the difficulty. Now you're going, but hang on a moment, that difficulty might be a difficulty of 7. Aha, indeed. That would be almost impossible for a doctor to heal up. But it gets even worse. If your character suffered an injury during combat, and it wasn't dealt with during combat, someone didn't try and first aid your character, the difficulty increases by 1. So suddenly you're suffering 8 or 9 in terms of your difficulty number. Now, this seems impossible to achieve. So, as the GM, one of the options presented in the book is for this to become an extended task. And the ramifications are, if the doctor doesn't complete the extended task within a certain number of rolls, the character then suffers a permanent representation of that injury. A prosthetic is applied, a scar, a wound, something remains that cannot really be dealt with properly. These create amazing character backstories and stories that can be linked into future adventures and things, so it's something to be looked at almost positively rather than negatively.
The alien is in medium range. Hanat and Hero are both in the same zone.
Surrender!
Die, Federation scum!
The alien fires. Hanat, you do not have cover. The alien is using a disruptor pistol on Deadly. Control plus security, 14. 3 successes. Severity 4. I spend 2 threat to increase the weapon to 6, because the weapon is intense. Hanat, you must suffer 6 stress to avoid the injury.
Captain! I'm all right. Just a glancing blow. Take cover. Aye, sir.
I'll kill you all.
The initiative is yours.
I'm going to go first, and I'm going to spend 1 momentum to move to cover because the terrain is quite difficult. Is that correct?
You are correct.
I spend an additional 2 momentum to take a second major action. I then shoot the alien using control and security with a difficulty of 2 plus the additional 1 for the extra major action. So that's difficulty of 3. Oh, come on, dice. Yeah, 4 successes. That's brilliant. I deal 3 damage to the alien.
The initiative switches to the alien. The alien fires again. He is using the E.A.M.H minor action. He is targeting you, hero.
Oh, just my day. All right, come and get me, you alien who we don't understand fully and would really like to talk to instead of shoot at.
The alien ignores you. He only rolls a single success. However, as he is using the E.A.M.H minor action, he has a reroll. The alien gains an additional success. That gives the alien 2 successes. Hero, as you have cover, you are opposing this roll. Use control and security.
I got 3 successes. Yes, suck on that, you alien scumbag.
You have beaten the alien.
Marvelous. I'm going to spend 2 momentum to counterattack. I've got a Type 1 phaser. It's set to stun. The severity is 3.
You deal 3 damage to the alien.
Well, hold up a moment. I'm actually going to spend 2 additional momentum to increase that severity to 4.
You deal 4 damage to the alien. The alien drops.
You should have surrendered, mate, and we should have shot first. Nah, sorry, Captain. That's next week's episode.